The Grey Cup picture is set. Toronto Argonauts and Winnipeg Blue Bombers going head-to-head in the Grey Cup this season in BC. And courtesy of Bobby DeBow, we have a nice little background at BC Place here. Bobby, initial gut reaction when you saw the Argos punch their ticket and the Bombers punch their ticket to the Grey Cup?
Well, I guess we said last week, what are you going to handicap this game? Saying there's going to be 5 turnovers, like there was last year in Toronto, and yeah, the exact same thing happened. But like just first reaction to this line, and I know we'll get into it a little more as we go on here, but like I can't make any sense of it. So like aside from the obvious, like Nick Arbuckle starting at quarterback, I don't know how you can upgrade those Argos after that last game. I don't think they were the right side. 5 turnovers, even the interceptions looked more like fumbles, and you can't really kind of handicap for that kind of stuff, right? Meanwhile, you got Winnipeg just like destroyed Saskatchewan. The game was lined at 3.5. I thought that was wrong. Should have been closer to a touchdown, in my opinion. And we've been high on Winnipeg all year. I was high on them last week. I bet against Toronto last week, but this number where we're at right now, it's like 10.5. It's insane. It's the highest line all year, and it's even worse because it's on a neutral. Like if this was in Winnipeg, you'd be thinking 14, and that's kind of like a Taylor Cornelius auto bet number. So I don't know. I think this line is pretty crazy. I'm hoping there's something I'm missing here, so I don't just keep going into it at 10. But Victor had a 13. I don't know what they're doing, but you can't really bet at them anyway. So, yeah, I'm just hoping somebody can kind of talk some sense into me here, say that this line is somewhat reasonable. So, that's my goal for this week in Vancouver.
Well, we're excited. We're going to have our first guest of the show of this season, first guest of the show ever, Ian Cameron at Bobano. And, I've worked with Ian for several years, and my first ever CFL show was with Ian. We called it the 3-Down Breakdown. So really looking forward to getting Ian's thoughts. He's been handicapping the CFL for a really long time. Last week, 30-28 for the Argos over the Alouettes, 38-22 win for the Bombers over the Rough Riders. As you said, one game was a lot closer than the other, but one game had a lot more turnovers than the other did. And for me, again, the score for the Argos and Alouettes game makes it sound like it was a really tight game and a really good game. But the score might not represent exactly how close that game really was or how quality it really was with how many turnovers there really were. And I'm tired of seeing turnovers in CFL playoff games. I'm tired of seeing it. But I want to before we jump into the actual matchup of the Grey Cup this year with Toronto versus Winnipeg, I want to get into kind of how these teams got here. So let's bring in Ian Cameron. If you don't know who Ian is by now, and you know me, you should know Ian, one of the hardest working guys in the industry, handicaps a ton of sports, but always make sure to show love to the Canadian sports and the CFL. Ian, how are you?
Hey guys, good to be with you here, Andrew, Bobby. Grey Cup week is here. I have some interesting thoughts about it in a second, but good to be with you guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. The Football Frenzy was appointment viewing all summer, and the last few weeks NFL, I'm having a hard time finding it on your feed. So glad to have you right here to get it right from.
I had no friggin' time, unfortunately, Bobby, to get that show recorded last week. I hate that it came to that because it's division finals. You hate not being able to do a CFL show, but at this time of year when you got, NBA and college basketball, and you got hockey, and you've got football, and you've got everything going on, you're doing multiple shows a day. It slipped through the cracks, unfortunately, but we won't make that mistake this week. We will have a Grey Cup preview show for the Football Frenzy later in the week, even though I'll get into it right now. I won't save it. I've been watching the CFL now for 30. Obviously, I'm going to be 40, believe it or not, next year. So I'm going to be an old man right around the corner. Probably already feels like it certain days that I'm an old man. But I'll say this. I've been watching the CFL probably since I was, 7 or 8 years old. So what's that, 1992, 1993? Always get excited for the Grey Cup. Been going to Ticats games for 3 decades now here in Hamilton. I have never felt a less amount of excitement and enthusiasm for a Grey Cup in my life than this one. It's not even debatable. Like, they could put the Grey Cup this year in my backyard. I would consider drawing the blinds. Seriously. That is how much apathy I have for this game. Obviously, I can't stand the Argos. You know what I think about Chad Kelly? I've made those comments on Twitter X very public. And I'm sick to death of this Winnipeg Blue Bombers team. What is this now? Their 5th year in a row in the Grey Cup. And then you throw in that a backup quarterback is playing in the game for one of the two teams. And I'm telling you what, as far as excitement, and there's usually something I can latch onto with every Grey Cup, something that's going to get me enticed and excited about the game. I'm going to say it right now because I know it's going to be the truth. When it's 6:30 Eastern time, Sunday night, and that game is kicking off, I'll be watching Chiefs Bills still. I'll be quite honest with you. I will be. I'll get to the Grey Cup once that's over. But that is basically, I couldn't say it any more clear, just how unenthused I am by this Grey Cup. And from a betting perspective, it's not just from a viewing and a fan and an entertainment perspective. From a betting perspective, I feel the exact same way about this damn game.
Well, Ian, you've got 2 reasons to not like both of these teams. And, like you said, like you talked about, Winnipeg beating the Ticats not once, but twice in the Grey Cup in the past handful of years. And then, of course, the Argos, the rivalry with the Ticats. So I know you leave fandom at the door when it comes to betting, but of course, neither of these teams are definitely teams you're rooting for unless you have a betting interest between them. But,
I hate the Argos so much, Andrew, but I've made money with them, and I still hate them.
Right.
The last couple of weeks. So,
well, look, Winnipeg's batting 500, right? They've been to the Grey Cup for 4 straight years, but they're batting 500 and they're 0-2 the last 2 Grey Cups. They had a bad start to the season this year. It didn't matter. They got it going. And the funny thing is, at first it was their defense, Ian, that was creating success for them, but then it was just their offense. Who cares what their defense does if you're putting up 30 plus points? So before you hopped on, we weren't really looking at this week's matchup. We were talking about what we saw last week. What were your overall reactions about the divisional final games?
Well, from a betting perspective, it was all right. We had the Argos. We had another Argos game over the total against Montreal. Now we got some defensive scores. I get that. We got a little fortuitous. It wasn't all, the Montreal offense and the Toronto offense moving the ball and scoring those points to get it up and over the total, but we'll take it with the Argos in the over. I was on Saskatchewan in the other game. Disappointing. Personal friend, Trevor Harris, seeing him go out was very disappointing as well. And look, Winnipeg played great. Let's be honest, flat out. They're the much better team, both sides of the ball. When your defense is that poor in the first half, and lets Winnipeg just zip right down the field, drive after drive, you're asking to lose. Simple as that. Very disappointing from a guy that was brought in as head coach, Corey Mace, with a defensive background, to see his team defensively get shredded like that, right off the hop in that game on Sunday. So, but credit to Winnipeg. They were the better team there in that game. And I think we've got a game here where you got to give Nick Arbuckle credit, in a tough spot after the leg injury to Chad. He still had to make a couple of throws, and Toronto it felt like they had to hang on for dear life to win. I wonder if there was a such thing as a 5th quarter in a CFL game if Toronto was going to win that game last week. But they had enough of a cushion as far as the lead when Chad Kelly left the game that it gave Nick Arbuckle and the Argos team a little bit of a margin for error, to be able to hang on and secure that win. But now it's going to be interesting. You're talking about a Winnipeg team that's now going to have a full week knowing Nick Arbuckle's the quarterback. And we'll get into this game in a second, but there's a couple concerns I have for Nick Arbuckle in this game. And to me, the clear concern is the matchup he's going to face, you guys, against this Winnipeg secondary. The talk and the focus, certainly on the TSN side, it will be, is Zach Collaros' resurgence, Brady Oliveira's MOP-worthy season, the offense's turnaround after the bad start Winnipeg had. Nobody, and I mean nobody, is talking about how awesome this pass defense and this secondary has been for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. The whole lot of them. All 5 starters, they've been terrific. Terrell Bonds, Dietrich Nichols. They just got Brandon Alexander back in the West Final. I think one of their better defensive backs in that secondary. How about the season Evan Holm has had in that secondary? Everybody can't wait to talk about Trey Ford all season for the Edmonton Elks. How about his little brother? How about Terrell Ford? He's balling What a great player he's been in this secondary for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers all season long as well. They are loaded in that secondary. And my biggest concern with the Argos in this game, and Nick Arbuckle specifically, you're going to hear this stat thrown out a lot in the NFL and college football these days. It's a very popular stat that handicappers, people that research and the league, player props as well, people that get into that, they look at turnover-worthy plays. It's a very, very a good stat to gauge just how much the quarterback is putting the ball at risk, putting the ball in contested coverage, forcing it, making bad decisions. Nick Arbuckle, and we'll see if you guys agree. I've been watching him a lot now over the years. He is the poster child of turnover-worthy plays. He is putting that ball into dangerous areas, risking interception, forcing it when someone's not open. And the problem with this matchup for him against this Winnipeg secondary is it's just damn difficult to gain separation with your receivers against this secondary. They're like gnats. They just stick to you. This Winnipeg secondary group, the halfbacks, the cornerbacks, they have done an amazing job just not letting receivers get open. So my concern is if these receivers don't get open, and they have great receivers, obviously. Coxie, Mackay Polk has been a revelation this year for the Argos. Make no mistake about it. They have guys that can catch the football, David Ungerer and others. But the problem I have here with this matchup for Arbuckle is Ryan Dinwiddie and his coaching staff are going to have to work overtime to say, if there's nothing open, throw it away. Okay, live to fight another day. Live for second down. Okay, you don't have to be a hero every single play. When you have a secondary that is playing this well and a quarterback with the historical tendency to put the ball into harm's way and those turnover-worthy plays, forcing something that's not there, that's going to be the job of this coaching staff in practice this week to extricate those tendencies from Nick Arbuckle. And if they don't, it could be a long day.
Bobby, what do you think? Arbuckle.
All right. Yeah, I've been kind of on this Arbuckle. He had a good year when he came in for Bo Levi in 2019. He was supposed to be the next guy, kind of floated around, got dunked out of Edmonton, finally got an opportunity eventually after Caleb Evans started way too many games in Ottawa, and he came out and laid a bunch of eggs. So I was a believer in Arbuckle. I'm not anymore, but you can only not believe in somebody so much. Like this look ahead for this game was 3.5, and Kelly to Arbuckle, I don't see 7 points of drop off. I don't even know if Logan Bonner would be 7 points of drop off. So I think it was too high already.
For what it's worth, Bobby does not like Bonner. Bobby loves making jokes.
Who the hell would like that guy? Who would like any quarterback that played for Calgary this year, really, outside of Matt Schultz, who actually was okay, at times, former Ticat. And I thought he played okay. Everyone else was a stiff, as far as I'm concerned, with that Calgary quarterback room. But
Bobby, you're right,
point, to Bobby's point about the 10.5, I can't lay 10.5 with Winnipeg. I'm not going to lay 10.5 with Winnipeg here. I fully agree that they're playing great. If they replicate what they did against Saskatchewan last week against Nick Arbuckle and this Argos offense, Argos are in trouble and they may get blown out. But you're paying a premium now. That's the point. You're paying a premium now with Winnipeg, laying the 10.5 points here in this game because of the quarterback change. And another thing we have to factor in here with this Argos team, there's a lot of talent here. I know that they don't have Chad Kelly, and Nick Arbuckle is a huge downgrade. And as I said, I am petrified about this matchup he's going to face with this Winnipeg secondary, where it's difficult to get the separation with opposing receivers. They just stick to you. And I'm worried about those interceptions coming into play. But they've started to run the football more down the stretch. Dinwiddie finally got a clue and said, we can't just be pass heavy all the time. We've got to incorporate Kadeem Carey, Daniel Adeboboye, and all these, they have a couple of really good running backs. Run the football. And that's going to be important, I think, here. Take pressure off Nick Arbuckle. Run the football, establish the run. It's not always easy to run against Winnipeg, but you got to at least put it in their mind and at least try to take some pressure and keep Nick Arbuckle ahead of the chains. Keep him in manageable second down situations. And I think that's going to be something that they're going to have to work in to this offensive game plan. The defense is a concern for the Argos because it feels like a lot of their stops are turnovers. You can move the ball on Toronto. It's been that way all year. They give up big plays. They give up yards week in and week out. but they've also mastered the art, and we saw it last week against Montreal in a lot of the games they've won, bending but not breaking in the red zone. I will say this, their red zone defense has gotten better later in the season, but they have forced a lot of turnovers, and we saw it again against Cody Fajardo and the Alouettes last week. That's critical. That's critical. You're up against it because we're talking about a multiple-time Grey Cup champ quarterback. Zach Collaros been one of the best quarterbacks, and you got Nick Arbuckle. That's like taking a butter knife to a knife fight. So from that standpoint, you've got to be careful here, and you've got to find ways to keep yourself alive, afloat, and in the game. How do you do that? You rely on your defense. You run the football. You force turnovers. It is imperative. Now, you could say this about any team in any game, but for the Argos, given their situation and the downgrade from Kelly to Arbuckle, they have to win the turnover battle in this game. It's an absolute must. If they lose the turnover battle, they're fucked. It's done. They have to win the turnover battle. And they have done a decent job here down the stretch, forcing those turnovers, that defense. Critical for any chance they have on Sunday.
Yeah, I
Bobby,
think
didn't mean to cut you off there. My bad. You go ahead.
No, but this defense is what's it's the only reason they're gonna be in this game, right? So like these last two meetings they had, like the first meeting was against Cam Dukes in July, and the Bombers lost. It was they were favored by just over a field goal a month ago when they lost. And I don't want to get all CFL.ca on you here, but the Bombers barely scored 10.5 points the last two games they played. The last two games they played, Toronto's had 2 wins. Winnipeg's had 2 losses. So
Yep.
I think that the Argos defense is basically the key there. And if you're going to look at like 10.5, even this total it seems pretty high. And if like I'm already clearly on the Argos, but I just don't know how we're going to get to this 50 points. One, with Arbuckle, if he's careful, if the Argos are going to be in this game, it means he's not going to be making those turnovers. And 2, how are the Bombers going to move against this Argos defense that's kind of shut them down all year, shut a lot of teams down all year. A lot of these points in Montreal, they did do a fairly good job of moving the ball against them last game. But the rest of their games that I can remember for the Argos, a lot of these points they've been giving up have been in garbage time, right? Yeah. So, or even the games against Hamilton, they played a bunch of wacky stuff to start the game, and then they kind of clawed their way back. So I think this Argos defense, nothing's changed on that end, right? Nothing's changed from Winnipeg relatively since the earlier meetings in the year. So I think there's a lot to like about this Argos team, and if you just have Nick Arbuckle be like a serviceable, decent backup quarterback, kind of like the Matt Schultz that you'd want to have on your team, then I think there's no way that this game's going to double digits. And there might be a chance that weird things happen like last year. Alouettes were dogs by 9 points at the opening. So a lot can go wrong for the Bombers in the Grey Cup, and they've proven that 2 out of the last 4 meetings.
Yeah. Well, these large spreads too. I always say this, and I say this in every single sport. Do you think that if the Blue Bombers win this weekend and they don't win by X amount of points, they're going to be disappointed? No, they don't care. Like Ian, you communicated on and off with Trevor Harris, who created a friendship with him. Do you think he gave a rat's ass in certain weeks in the middle of July if he covered a point spread or if he won the game? That's what these athletes care about. We care about point spreads. They care about the ring that's going to be on their finger if they win the Grey Cup, and that's the thing we're looking at here. And when I take a look at some of these recent Grey Cups, Bobby talks about Montreal. I even look at Toronto a handful of years ago. I look at Ottawa a handful of years ago. It's one thing to win the Grey Cup. People talk about how competitive the CFL can really be. And now you're giving a team, a 10.5 point start. We've got the Argos on Sunday. They're starting the game up 10-0, right? And to me, when I look at some of these matchups, history between these teams, as Bobby talked about, it has fared well for the Argos. I will say, though, I was against the Argos in week 1. I thought I hated on the Red Blacks all year on this show, Ian. I hated on them. Did not like them at all. The Red Blacks cost me money. I made money betting against them. It was a love-hate relationship with that Red Blacks team. I didn't like the Argos to blow out the Red Blacks. And I think if it wasn't for some turnovers and just how horrible the Red Blacks defense was, the Argos gave up some points. But I think that you look at last week, I talked about the impressive number of points that Winnipeg's putting up this season, where they're not just winning games relying on their defense. The Winnipeg of the last 4 years, making the Grey Cup, some of those games, guys, it was relying on their defense. Now they're putting up points. And they gave up 22 points to Saskatchewan last week. I don't think it was Saskatchewan's best game. We still saw Harris with 283 yards. The running game was weak, but Schaefer Baker at 162 yards. If you spread that out, I feel like they can have success. And I'll go back to you with this, Ian. I liked what you said there about the turnover-prone QBs, right? It's a really big thing people talk about now. Remember when Caleb Williams said that his punter won't have to punt very much? Well, how's that working out for him in Chicago? We not very good, but
not very good. They just fired their offensive coordinator. Can't be going well.
Yeah. But I'm going to go back to you with this. Is it a possibility that without Chad Kelly being there and Nick Arbuckle being behind center, that they simplify the offense, and that could be a good thing for this Argos team and an even better thing for our cover? Because if you simplify things and you don't try and take shots, you like the run game. Bobby talked about the total, and potentially the dog and the under could correlate here. You know, I think maybe they don't try and make Arbuckle be anything he isn't, and sometimes that can be a good thing.
No doubt. The one thing the Argos do have, too, is most weeks they've got their offensive line's pretty reliable. It's pretty solid. And we have certainly seen that down the stretch. And even last week against Montreal, you know, Kadeem Carey had 92 yards on the ground for the Argos in that game against the Alouettes. And like I said, we did see them open up holes for the run game. We saw them protect reasonably well against a very good Montreal defense, which has been one of the top defenses all year in the CFL. Rely on that O-line and rely on your scheming and your play calling. You're right. This is not the time for Nick Arbuckle to be forcing the ball downfield in coverage. Give him short to intermediate passes. Get the running backs to catch the ball out of the backfield. You know, the screen game, I think, is going to be important here for the Toronto Argonauts in this game, especially when you factor in that I know, obviously, Jackson Jeffcoat retired at the end of last season, but you still have Willie Jefferson to deal with. You still got some semblance of strong pass rush, which has been one of the hallmarks of this Winnipeg team. The 5 years now they've been in the Grey Cup in a row. You know, you've got to slow down that pass rush. How do you do that? Well, you dump the ball off and get it out of your hands quickly. And I think that's something that Nick Arbuckle, I think, if I think this is the way they should be game planning the offense, I have to have faith and confidence. Ryan Dinwiddie knows this. So from that standpoint, you know, give Nick Arbuckle a fighting chance. Don't let him, throw the ball 50 times. Run the ball, quick screen game, short to intermediate passes. You've got guys in space that can make people miss. And let's not forget how good the Argos have been on special teams this year. I know, obviously, Sergio Castillo has been an amazing kicker for Winnipeg. He's been drilling these 50, 60-yard field goals. But Liram Hajrullahu, who's no slouch. This is a guy that got a look in the NFL, a few years ago with the Dallas Cowboys. And they've got one of the best returners in the CFL this year in Janarian Grant, who is a former Bomber, who is a threat to give Toronto plus field position every single time he touches the ball on a punt return or a kickoff return. So let's not sleep on the special teams element. Now, the counter argument to that is, well, you're talking about Mike O'Shea coached Winnipeg team, a guy that has always put emphasis on special teams. Yes, I get that. But Toronto is not standing down, in my opinion, in the special teams battle in this football game. They've got a very good unit on that side of the ball. Mickey Donovan, their special teams coordinator, has done a really nice job with that group over the years. And if they can get Nick Arbuckle in easy throws, easy completions, keep the pass rush off, he doesn't force things. These are a lot of ifs, don't get me wrong, but a lot of ifs are going to have to be check marks for Toronto if they're going to hang in this game and have a chance to win. And they get some good return yardage from Grant to set them up in good field position. There are pathways for Toronto to make this a competitive Grey Cup.
Bobby, under and underdog, is that correlation, you think that's really alive here? Like the favorite and over and under and underdog?
Well, I have no idea what to do with totals usually. So, but that's like, I guess that from my square handicap of this game in terms of the total, I would think you'd have to. This isn't a shock, as much of a shock as it would be to any other team. Like, these Argos played half a year without Chad Kelly. They played most of those games with Cam Dukes, who Arbuckle's kind of emerged as a safer bet handling the ball, which is ironic to say given what Ian's just said and given what we've seen whenever Arbuckle has been given the opportunity before. But I think they have a game plan. They're not going to be panicking right now. They got him plenty of game time at the end of the year as well, anticipating if anything bad would happen. So I just don't know how you get this number of the 10.5. I think is a ridiculous number. So even the look ahead 3.5, I was ready to be on the Argos with Kelly. I don't know. Again, like there's not many teams in professional football where there's a 7-point downgrade from the starter to the backup. So I'm trying to find a reason not to keep pounding the Argos right now at this number, and like nothing really stands out. Like you'd need things out of the ordinary to happen, or not out of the ordinary, but out of the game script to happen. You need a lot of turnovers. You'd need Toronto to start leaking at all angles. So I don't really see a realistic way of Winnipeg. Like if you have a Winnipeg 10.5 ticket, when are you going to feel comfortable in this game? This is the CFL. Backdoor covers happen all the time. Ridiculous games like Ottawa comes back and covers these live in-game -14s when they're down by 30. Like bad teams even come back to cover, and Toronto's not a bad team even with Arbuckle quarterback.
Well, I guess we have to think if they're making this line what it is, guys. Somebody out there is betting the Bombers. There are CFL bettors that are going to be doing it, or else this number wouldn't be what it is. But it sounds like it's a bit of a consensus here. Would you guys believe me if I told you Winnipeg was the bottom team as far as passing yards per game this season, and Toronto was ahead of them in the standings as far as rushing yards per game on the season? It seems to me like Winnipeg was just well-rounded, a little bit of everything. They did well on special teams. They were in the middle of the pack with this, little middle of the pack with that. Ian, when I scroll through some of the past Grey Cup champions and their scores, we often think colder weather, of course, here in Canada, whether it's in BC, whether it's in Toronto, whether it's in Hamilton, a little bit colder compared to July and August, of course, but the score hasn't been impacted by that whatsoever. You've kind of leaned on it a little bit already and talked about it, but Grey Cups, we've seen points. We've seen coaches go for it. One thing Bobby's educated me on this season is which coaches to trust that go for it and don't go for it. And it's made me hate some coaches, and we shouldn't throw that word around, but it's bothered me quite a bit, cost me some money. But looking at some of these games, Ian, as of late, recently 28-24, we saw a 33-25. We've seen some higher scoring Grey Cups. It doesn't mean low scoring games by any means, even though it is a championship game.
Yet there was an under in the mix, and it was the Grey Cup with these same two teams just a couple of years ago in a 24-23 Toronto win, where there were 47 points in that game, and it did stay under the total. Not by much, but it did stay under the total there. And very interesting as far as that's another reason why I'm no longer interested in Winnipeg now at 10.5. You look at the last three Grey Cups, 2020. Remember, there was no Grey Cup in 2020. It was the COVID pandemic year. 2021, 2022, 2023. We had an 8-point margin in the 2021 Grey Cup. Winnipeg won that against my Ticats. We had the 1-point loss for Winnipeg against Toronto 2 years ago. We had a 4-point game last year. It's not like Winnipeg's played blowout Grey Cups here the last 3 years. They've been competitive games. They've been down to the wire. And what's ironic about Chad Kelly getting injured this year is 2 years ago, Chad Kelly rescues the Toronto Argonauts at the end of that Grey Cup against Winnipeg, replacing an injured McLeod Bethel-Thompson in that game. Coming in late, and the Argos get the Grey Cup win there against the Bombers. Now it's the shoes on the other foot. Chad Kelly's been the starter all year. Now he's hurt, and now the Argos have to go to a backup quarterback. Couple of interesting intangibles here for this game, one for each side. Toronto first. From everything I saw with the celebration after beating Montreal, a lot of emotion, a lot of rallying the troops and win one for the Gipper mindset here coming into this game, where it's like, let's band together and let's get this done for Chad Kelly. And they're making him sound like he's just the best human being on planet Earth. But maybe he's been angelic since his past transgressions. Who knows? I don't know. We're not around him. You hope that's the case, but they genuinely seem to like the guy, and maybe he's been just a model citizen since, the incidents that took place previously. And good on him that he's maybe learned some lessons if that's the case. But the bottom line is clearly the Argos team, the teammates, whatever you think of Chad Kelly, just throw it away for a second. They clearly love him as a teammate. They do. And they certainly talked like it after the win against Montreal. They are definitely going to band together, and that emotional bent is clearly on their side for this game. Like, let's band together. Let's get this done for Chad Kelly. Let's get this done. Show that we're not just about him. We're the Argos. We're not the Toronto Chad Kellys. We're the Toronto Argos. We can get this job done without him. And then on the Winnipeg side, this is about their legacy, because this is now their 5th Grey Cup in a row. If they lose this game, for all this talk about what a dynasty they've been, how they've been the model team in the CFL, the best team in the CFL, one of the best 5-year runs in the history of the league. If they lose this game, they drop to 2-3 in these 5 Grey Cups they've been in. And if you're the Bombers, that's not what you want. There's a huge difference for them being 2-3 in these Grey Cups versus 3-2. So for Winnipeg, and then losing 2 in a row now against Toronto and the heartbreaker against Montreal. By the way, you talk about a Grey Cup I was excited about, and part of it was in Hamilton, but even without my Ticats in it, I was excited about that matchup. Montreal was red hot last year, hottest team going into that game against the mighty Bombers. It was a phenomenal game, back and forth. Fajardo wins it with the late drive in the 4th quarter. It's a great football game. That's 2 years in a row Winnipeg's had their heart ripped out of their chest in the Grey Cup. They are coming. This is like a business trip for them, and I've already seen it with Zach Collaros talking to the media and Brady Oliveira in the press conference yesterday. This is a business trip for them. They're not fucking around here. So all the more reason why, if you're Toronto, you've got to be almost letter perfect to give yourself a chance in this game. So, but there are 2 things that I think benefit these teams. It's Winnipeg. We don't want to lose a 3rd in a row. 3-2 is a hell of a lot better than 2-3 in this 5-year run of being in the Grey Cup game. And for Toronto, you're going to rely on, we're banding together emotionally and showing we can get it done without Chad Kelly. Those are the 2 intangible storylines, I think, that I see from both sides.
Bobby?
Yeah, this Chad Kelly thing is quite a turn of events for him. He was the most hated guy in the league, and I don't know.
The nature of the injury, Bobby. No one likes to see a guy's season end like that, just carted off. And for as much as people might think dirtbag and things he's done in the past and all that, even I was like, that kind of sucks, man. I'm a big Chad Kelly.
But if you hate a guy this much, is that?
Yeah,
I'm not cheering for injuries or anything like that. I don't really attack people online like he was getting attacked nonstop, right? A lot of worse things were said. A lot of worse things were wished upon him. Yeah. And I just thought it was kind of weird that now he's like, this sympathetic figure, at least for the team. It's a team to rally around.
That's the demarcation line for me, Bobby. I stopped short of wanting someone to get hurt when I don't, and I don't want that. Even for Chad Kelly, I don't want that.
But you raised a good point though earlier in the show about the fact that early in the season, what were we handicapping guys when it came to the Argos? It was Cam Dukes. We were talking about it, and I think a lot of the stuff that you were saying, Bobby, when you and I were doing our show in week 4, 5, 6, even was, what would this line be with Chad Kelly? Were we getting a discount on some numbers that the Argos were in? Because they were a pretty good ATS team. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. Early in the season, because of the numbers we were getting.
Yeah, week 1.
Yeah,
week one against the Lions,
BC, right?
Yeah, and that was it was a huge adjustment. The exact same thing we're saying right now. A huge adjustment for Chad Kelly not being there, and they won the game outright.
Well, and I hate to bring this up because you're a BC native and look at the background we have and where it is, but let's not forget about the guy that was supposed to be the NFL. The NFL superstar, apparently
top 20 quarterback in the world, right?
Yeah, exactly. The guy Nathan Rourke. I mean, look at the adjustment they had from him to VA, and FanDuel Canada putting the most ridiculous prices, Ian, together for futures after Nathan Rourke came back. The guy hadn't played a meaningful football game in 2.5 years, besides 2 or 3 minutes each game in the NFL preseason, and yet this guy was going to change a franchise for the better. And now he pretty much booted VA out of town. I think the lesson we're learning here, and what we're really trying to describe here, is whatever happens in the Grey Cup, the 111th Grey Cup, we think that there's definitely an overreaction being taken place due to the quarterback situation. And we're very curious to see how things are handled. The turnover battle is going to be very key. Limiting mistakes is going to be very key. Like Ian said, it's a business trip here. One thing about this Winnipeg team, they're not playing off emotion. They're playing off experience. They've been there before. They've been there, done that. They know what they're doing. Their coaching staff knows what they're doing. And I'll go to you for some final thoughts with this, Ian, is that I really like some Kadeem Carey props. He had 92 yards last week, and I understand that if a team is projected to be down all game, well, one might say, well, how can you like a running back for a team that's projected to be down? Well, I think as much as they possibly can, until they can no longer do it, the run game will be important to this Argos team this weekend. Any closing thoughts, Ian, for us?
Yeah, it better be important to them for the running game, because you don't, like I said, you can't have Nick Arbuckle throwing the ball 45, 50 times. That's not your pathway to success. That's not your pathway to giving yourself a chance in this game. You've got to have Kadeem Carey incorporated throughout this football game and rely on that run game. And to be honest with you, with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, that secondary is lethal, which I talked about, a lot earlier in the show. And I worry about, they just are so good at not letting receivers get behind them down the field. Like, it's just incredible how well that collective group is at being able to keep the receivers in front of them. And it shows. They're the number one team in passing yards allowed, 234.8 passing yards allowed per game, number one. But they're only number 6 in the CFL this year, rushing yards allowed per game. So believe it or not, the run game has been your better opportunity to try to move the football against Winnipeg. So all the more reason why, and you've got to take pressure off Arbuckle. You've got to be balanced in your offense here with this guy, particularly at quarterback, and knowing that secondary is a lockdown secondary, the way they've played down the stretch and the way they just don't let receivers get behind their defensive backs. They just don't, or rarely do they let that happen. So, and you don't want Nick Arbuckle, like I said, forcing the ball, which has been his problem his whole career, forcing the ball into coverage, rely on the run game, short passes. It's all, not just Kadeem Carey props, but also the receiving yards props, if there are any for Kadeem Carey. Because I think in the screen game, which I think is going to be very important, and Dinwiddie does like the screen game. I think even more you're going to see that here, given the matchup.
I wish we could get rushing plus receiving like we'll get in the NFL. I don't think CFL player props, we really see those combo bets as much. But before we get Bobby's closing thoughts, Ian, I don't want to, force a score prediction out of you. I always kind of get a little bit fumbled when someone says exact score prediction. Morency is famous for that. When we join him on his show, he wants an exact score prediction from us. But anything you can throw out to us that people should be looking at on Sunday.
I probably, for as much as I love my overs, I probably have to lean under here a little bit. At 49, I mean, you saw Toronto, Winnipeg, 2 meetings, stay way under the total this year. Now, the concern is, what if the turnovers creep in for Nick Arbuckle? And Toronto's forced a ton of turnovers, including turnovers that lead to scores, as in defensive scores, and that could just throw the under right out the window. And they had one of those at least last week against Montreal. We know Nick Arbuckle is always a threat to turn the ball over. So that's what could have been set up short fields, and that can quickly throw your under out of whack. But I think if you're going to ask, certainly Toronto, to drive the football down the field, I think they're going to try to slow it down. They should a little bit, run the ball a bit, be balanced, short to intermediate throws. It'll take time off the clock. And if this Toronto defense can just contain Oliveira a little bit, and I do like their defensive front, and I do like the pressure they're capable of getting on quarterbacks at times. Can they bring that pass rush? And look, outside of the incomparable, phenomenal, surefire, Hall of Fame bound left tackle Stanley Bryant for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He's been amazing. He's been an 8-time All-Star, 8 years in a row an All-Star left tackle in this league. There's been a lot more holes. Patty Neufeld's not getting any younger. And a lot of these guys on this offensive line for Winnipeg are long in the tooth a little bit. So, and there's been times when the pass rush has gotten to Zach. And it's going to be very important for Toronto to do that here. So lean to the under in the game. I think I will be on Toronto for something small. This is not unload the bankroll type of game for me. It shouldn't be anyway. Just like I say for people with the Super Bowl, treat it like another game from a betting standpoint. You don't just go big on it because it's the Super Bowl. So I'll lean Toronto, we'll lean under, and we will go with a final score in this game of Winnipeg 24 and Toronto 17. How about that?
Okay. All right. 24-17. Bobby, what do you think about that score? What are your closing thoughts on the Grey Cup?
Well, I can basically just echo what Ian said. Like this, the D line is going to be key. The D line had no problem getting to Collaros the first two meetings. They did have to rely on lots of turnovers. There were some wild fumbles. I think this was when Dembski was in the middle of his fumbleitis there for a while. Like they're going to have to kind of rely on that kind of stuff. Winnipeg's not going to get carried away. They're going to be kicking their 9-yard field goals. He's one of the O'Shea's one of the coaches that loves to do that. Dinwiddie isn't. Bottom line though, like Winnipeg's the best team in the league. I don't argue that, but this number's just too big. It's the highest line of the year. It shouldn't be in the Grey Cup. This isn't Calgary on the road against Montreal when they're the hottest team in the league. Week 6. This line implies that it should be like 13-14 if this was in Winnipeg, and I think that's way too much. Sometimes you have to bet against the best team in the league and take the points, and I think that's all I'm going to be doing there. I'll be I don't know if I'll be cheering for Chad Kelly when he covers the spread, let alone maybe wins the game, but I'll be more than happy to be in Vancouver with a close game. I like that 24-17. I'm more than happy with that. I don't mind Winnipeg winning. Just need the Argos to keep it close.
One last stat for Toronto, including last week when they actually opened as a dog against Montreal. They did open as a dog. 7-2 against the spread as an underdog this year. The Toronto Argonauts. Now, some of those games weren't Chad Kelly games, but 9 times they were a dog. 7-2 ATS this year. Toronto.
Gotta love that. And you gotta love the fact that Bobby will be at the game, and I really hope you get yourself a good game. Hope you can cash some tickets. I will be on Kadeem Carey rushing props when they come out. I do lean towards the dog here, and I think it correlates with the under, but I'll tell you what, guys, I am scared with turnovers. CFL playoffs feels like more turnovers in the playoffs than there are in the regular season.
2-on-1 play.
In the CFL, turnovers lead to points, and that's a real big thing that worries me a little bit. And also, as far as the recent history and a handful of these great cuts we've seen, a lot of points, no matter the weather, no matter the stage, we've still seen a ton of points. But it should be a great game. Huge thank you to Ian for joining us. Ian, I told you I wasn't going to keep you too long. I did. Between the three of us, though, we wanted to get our thoughts on this game. And Bobby, it was a pleasure doing the show all year with you. Can't wait to be back next year. Doing it. That's how we know it's the fall, guys. That's how we know.
No problem. I'm always willing to give you guys in this game, the Grey Cup, a few more minutes. No problem.
Awesome. Well, thank you to everybody for watching, whether you're watching on YouTube, whether you're watching on X. Show us some love. Hit the retweet, hit the subscription button on YouTube, like this video, and we wish you guys all the best with the 111th Grey Cup. All the best. We'll see you next time right here on Coast to Coast.